Hello, I'm Pete, and this is Retro Game Attic. Now, this is a FuncoLand price guide from March of 1999, so approximately from 19 years ago at the time of this video. FuncoLand, as some of you may know, was a beloved, used, and new video game retailer that was sold off and eventually absorbed into GameStop in the early 2000s. Along with this was Babbage's Electronics Boutique and a few others as well. Many stores today, such as Best Buy, Walmart, etc., sell used games, but having a dedicated retailer selling a large portion of used games was a pretty new concept back then. Many people have fond memories of FuncoLand because the stores, while corporate at heart, they had the feel and atmosphere of a mom-and-pop game store. They carried many retro systems. NES was sold well into the early 2000s. They had fair pricing. Used games were relatively cheap, and they had a generous trade-in value. So you can sell a used game or accessory to them, and they would either give you store credit or cash, which is unheard of these days. We also can't forget about those awesome cardboard cartridge sleeves that NES, Super NES, and Genesis games used to come in. I still have a few of my NES ones right here. These price guides were printed out monthly, and stacks of them were available for picking up at each FuncoLand location. I used to check these price guides a lot back then. I'd skim through for good game deals, circle my prospects, and hopefully scrounge up enough cash to buy them. Keep in mind, I was 14 years old in 1999. I was working my first job and was able to score a lot of cheap games back then because, priorities. I used to hold on to these for a while, but after numerous times moving, downsizing, and just other stuff, I ended up chucking all of them. This price guide, however, was included nestled in a stack of paperwork and instruction manuals in a used game lot that I snagged off of Craigslist not too far back. Thanks, other random hoarder. So without further ado, let's check out the March 1999 FuncoLand price guide. FuncoLand's slogan back then was, "Bring home the fun," while Best Buy's was, "Turn on the fun." I always found that kind of weird, that they were so close, but anyway. As you can see, even on the first page of this thing, the NES was still on the forefront, which really shows the staying power and longevity the system had. Consequently, the amount of Sega Saturn games were drastically reduced from FuncoLand store shelves at this point, just about 4 years after the North American launch. But smack dab on page 1, we can see the low prices of some of these games at this point. Let's check out what they were charging back then for some of the higher value NES games of today. Little Samson, Stadium Events, DuckTales 2, Nintendo World Championships Gold Cart. Just kidding. It's fun looking back on this and just seeing the crazy prices on some of these games and realizing that I should have bought them all. Another thing I used to look out for was names or writing in magic marker on some of the cartridges. My friends and I used to laugh at some of the stuff that was written on these things, and even go as far as to brag about how many Mike or John games we had in our collection. I don't know, we were kind of weird. I always found the accessories sections of these price guides to be pretty interesting as well. Back then you can find weird and rare NES accessories that you may have not even heard of before, some of which I still have today. Like this quick shot sighting scope. It's a hollow plastic shell that sits on the top of your zapper. It doesn't really improve the functionality at all, but hey, it looks pretty cool. Another weird one was this NES Bishu Jazz Pad. Nothing special, but they're somewhat uncommon these days. It's also notable to mention that the headings for all game consoles are in this plain ordinary font, while the Sega Genesis header is the official logo. Because damn right it is.
16-bit arcade graphics.
You can't do this on Nintendo.
Also, props to Midway for this fold-down advertisement of Rampage. From what I remember, these ads were not included in the earlier price guides, but were slightly more commonplace towards the last few years of their publishing. There wasn't a Dreamcast section included because it wasn't released in North America yet. Who can forget that infamous 9/9/99 date? They really crammed it down our throats back then. I'd be interested to see used prices of some Dreamcast games once it was released, though. Now on to the final page. This page is reserved for the failing, forgotten, and the foregone consoles. Usually you would see the likes of the 3DO, the Jaguar, Sega CD, 32X, and the last page, while FuncoLand clears out their inventory. But I think it was interesting to see the PlayStation on the final page. Now, it was on the tail end of its heyday in 1999, but it's still crazy to see it there while the NES is still on page 1. So there it is. Going through this really makes me miss FuncoLand. I had a ton of awesome memories of the place, from hanging out there while my parents shop at a nearby Bradley's department store, all the way up to when I was in high school in the late 90s, early 2000s, scooping up some cheap used games. It was just a really cool and unique place that treated their customers well before they were eventually destroyed by GameStop, which we know is the destroyer of all things good. Keep in mind, this was all from a consumer standpoint. I never worked at FuncoLand, so I'd be interested to hear opinions of people who have worked there. Now, I would guess that there aren't a ton of these price guides left, as they were just seen as trash back then, but they are a cool piece of gaming history that's fun to look at every once in a while. If anyone out there still has copies of these FuncoLand price guides, let me know in the comments, or just send me some photos. I'd love to check them out. I'd like to thank everyone again for watching, and stay tuned for new videos. I'm hoping to improve my turnaround time on these a little bit, so please bear with me. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you soon.